Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here today. As the chair was saying, I'm going to talk about circular cities, but I'm going to talk about circular cities from the manufacturing side. I think we have seen a lot of talks today talking about different aspects of cities, talking about the built environment, talking about consumption, recycling of waste, but we have talked very little about the production side of cities, and that's what I'm going to try to address in my talk today. So let's start with some kind of basic ideas about what is a city actually. Cities are in the society imaginarium since the beginning of civilizations. We have from the 15th century already Thomas More talking about the utopian city and what is a city and how to design a better city for society. And actually, if we think about cities, we have two main trends that explain how cities behave and what are the dynamics in cities. One is the economies of scale. So if we put things together, we are able to reduce the cost and increase efficiency and reduce the cost per unit of production. So we want to have things concentrated in the space because that will bring some benefits. And we also have economies of agglomeration. By having different activities on one space, we can benefit from each other in terms of, for example, logistics, transport, and all the things. But as these dynamics are positives, are bringing cities together, but they are also causing these economies of scale and these economies of agglomeration. So if we think about cities, there's great things about this concentration, but there's also things that are not so good, like pollution, traffic, noise. There's a number of other things that are kind of constraining the limit of cities. Why are cities important in this context of the circular economy? And I think cities are going to be the key issue in circular economy. If we want to transition to a circular economic world, we have to tackle cities because most of the people is going to be living in cities. Most of the resources will be consumed, are already being consumed in cities and will be consumed in cities. And also we have most of our consumption of natural resources, production of greenhouse gases happening in cities. So if we actually want to crack the sustainability or circularity issue, we need to address cities and how we live in cities and how we plan cities. Um, we also have to think cities as a very hubs of innovation and creativity. I think most of the innovations, most of the value added are also generated in cities, and we have to try to harness those opportunities and bring something new and bring new ways of thinking about the city and planning the city. I don't know if I have been sitting through some of the talks today, and they were really interesting and thought-provoking. But we haven't really reflected on what is a circular city and how we define a circular city. And probably each of us have a different idea of what a circular city look like and what it is. And what does it mean, circularity in the urban context? Is it about doing buildings that are modular? Is it about us trying to separate the bio and the technosphere? What is it a circular city and how we look at circular cities in the future? I think I've looked at it from the metabolism type. Kind of approach. Circular cities are like living organisms. We need food, we need materials, and we need inputs to keep the city going. But we also produce waste or unwanted outputs. And we have to think about how we actually can reduce the metabolism of the city, reduce our consumption of primary raw materials, and reduce the generation of waste in cities. And that's for me what it means to be a circular city, trying to reduce consumption of virgin materials, trying to reduce the waste that is generated by the city. So if we look at any organism, if we look at us as human beings, we need we have input side, we need energy, we need food, we need water. We use that to produce energy and to maintain our city, but we are generating a number of outputs. We are generating pollution, we are generating waste, and also other effluents. So how do we actually want to be, or how do we want to build a circular city if we look at it from this perspective of the urban metabolism? So we actually want to reduce this side. We want to be less dependent of virgin raw materials, And we actually also want to reduce the output side. We want to actually produce less waste that goes out to the city somewhere else, to a landfill or to an incineration. And within the city, cities are really complex organisms because we have people, we have communities, we have also infrastructures, and the infrastructures are going to be pretty much shaping the things that we can do and we cannot do. And we also have buildings, and we also have governance. And right now, it's actually working in a quite linear way. We have water, energy, and resources going into cities, being used in buildings, infrastructures, and by communities, and then generating large amounts of waste, materials, water, and energy, or heat. A circular city tries to actually change the way we look at this. We try to see how can we actually cascade water throughout the different uses in cities. What can we do to reduce our intake of water, reuse our greywater, reuse our rainwater in the city so that we depend less on our hinterland. A circular city is also thinking about how do we produce food in the city, for example. How do we use our green spaces? How do we use underutilized spaces, for example, roofs? Can we use roofs to produce food? Can we use even the facades of buildings to produce plants or to produce biomass that we can eat or we can use for generating energy? We can also think about materials, and materials that's really interesting. How do we use our materials in the city, and how can we make it circular? And here we have been talking a lot about waste and what can we do about the waste, but actually we look at our city, we look at London, an example of London, we have very few examples of actual recycling. So we are saying from the previous speaker, recycling rates are around 40%, 50%, but actually that's what goes into the recycling process. But actually, how many of those materials do we get actually back to the city? Many of those materials are they back in London as something that is productive? And if we look at that, that will be less than 5%, and I'm making up the number, but it's something like that. It's really minimal. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation said there's 3 key principles around circularity. If we want to increase circularity, we have to look at 3 principles. 1, preserve and enhance natural capital, and that's very much connected to Braungart talk before, saying it's not only about minimizing our impact, but it's also about enhancing natural capital. Can we actually leave our children a better world than the one we receive? It's also about optimizing resource use. Can we keep resources at the maximum function and level of performance for longer? Can we cycle them for longer? And then the 3rd principle, can we foster the system effectiveness? And that means we are not looking at one single system, for example, water or materials. We are working at the interface between different systems. Can we use some of the, wastewater to produce nutrients? Can we use some of the materials to produce energy and those kind of things? So we have interesting things here about thinking about these principles could make us think about what is a circular city and how can we actually move towards that. So I have here a number of principles that I have kind of condensed as my own understanding of circular city. It might be helpful to you or not. You might have some of the other principles or not. But I think a circular city has to think about how it produces energy, and that energy should come from renewable sources. We have also to think about how are we going to maintain resources at prime uses, and that means extending the life of resources in the technosphere, but also thinking about how are we going to use the nutrients from our biological cycle. Are we adaptable and resilient? Is the city able to adapt to different contexts, to different, for example, population growth, different combination of sectors or activities? Are we resilient? Can we adapt to, for example, climate change? The other key area is about wastage of resources, is avoiding the generation of waste. It's avoiding turning resources that have value into something that doesn't have any value, which is what happens with waste. So basically, we are taking things that are valuable, that we have paid money for it, and then we are turning it into something that doesn't have any value and that we just want to get rid of it. So we try to avoid that. We should try to get healthy environments. I think it's quite interesting that some of the circularity solutions that have been, or we have been seeing around this area or in other areas, are not really something that you will call a healthy solution. And I think that's when you need to think about, well, is it right to actually mix plastics in concrete or not? Maybe if we think about the end of life of that concrete block. And then we need to think about also jobs opportunities and how we could create benefits for different actors. There's a number of challenges, though, if we actually want to create those circular cities. And one of the key challenges, and that's what the kind of area that I try to address through my research, is the dissociation between consumption and production. If you think about cities, basically they are consumption hubs. We just consume everything, and we just produce a lot of waste. But where does our resources come from? I come from some other parts. We have even bigger and bigger hinterlands. And I'll show you some things about London that probably you might have guessed, but you might not know, actually. Does anyone knows where this picture is taken from? Can you guess which country in the world this is coming from?
I think it's the UK because those electrification structures look familiar.
Right, it's the UK and actually central London, believe it or not. This is one of the opportunity areas in London. It's called All Oak and Park Royal, and it's London. It doesn't look like London, doesn't look like central London, but this is 15 minutes away from Euston Station. So pretty central, and if you see it, it has been traditionally a manufacturing hub. Now it's going through a regeneration project, and the regeneration project aims to create 26,000 new homes and a lot of jobs as well, and some commercial office space. And it's meant to be one of the pilot projects demonstrating the opportunities to introduce circular economy principles in the designing of cities, which is good. But if we look at some of the projections about what is happening about materials only in this area, we can have some kind of food for thought or reflections about what a circular city is. So if we look, this is a Sankey diagram, so it's basically trying to trace how materials flow throughout the economy. So we see that here for this area, we are going to need a number of, quite a few number of different types of materials, biomass, metal ores, non-metallic minerals, energy carriers, that are going to be inputted in that area. But actually what is more interesting, I guess, is if we look at the output side. What is coming out of the area? We have really a small line here, which is household waste. Much bigger, which is construction and demolition waste, and quite a thick line that depicts commercial and industrial waste. Actually, if we look at most of our policies and we look most of our kind of recycling, circular economy policy efforts, they tend to concentrate on the household waste, which actually is kind of a nightmare. Household waste is a mix of different materials, cross-contaminated, very difficult to collect, very costly to collect from different households, and there's actually very little you can do with household waste. It's okay, you should try to recycle it, but actually if we look at the whole picture, the opportunities are not really on that side of the waste. So we look at, for example, construction and demolition waste or commercial and industrial waste. are a much of bigger chunk of the problem if we want to tackle circularity in the cities. And also if we look at the opportunities, commercial and industrial waste is actually quite good because it's quite homogeneous, means that it's producing large quantities and it's not so much cross-contaminated because companies will produce 1-2 main waste streams and not 20 like we do in our households. And they are easy to collect because they are produced at scale, and that can be used and reused to actually produce something useful. One recommendation, if we want to transform and we look at how to transition towards circular cities, is we should still give some some attention to household waste, but actually we should concentrate on other types of waste where the big opportunities lie. There's also another thing that might strike you. So what is that thick line on the top of that? And that's additions to the stock. And that means those are materials that are not that are being consumed by the industrial metabolism are staying in our stock. So that means that those are buildings, those are roads, and other infrastructures. So what this is telling us is that actually London, believe it or not, is every year it's becoming fatter and fatter. We are just accumulating materials that are remaining in the stock, and we have very little circularity in reality because most of those materials at some point will become waste and they will not come back to the city through the input side. So we run. I think, yeah, I don't have time to continue. But if just to finish off, I will say that we did some studies about trying to think about different potentials to increase circularity in cities. And I think there has been a really great emphasis in the last 5 years or so about, for example, anaerobic digestion, and different types of waste to energy opportunities to convert different types of biomass and then other types of waste materials into energy through different processes, including AD, including gasification, pyrolysis, etc. But actually, we look at the opportunities of recycling and waste to energy. What we are seeing, actually, we are competing for the same type of waste streams. So if we want to increase recycling, actually, we should give more emphasis to recycling rather than to waste to energy, because waste to energy will also be competing with the same waste streams that are actually good for recycling. So I leave it like that, and thank you so much.